captive audience. I'm actually taking a class out of Pacific College, and one of my assignments was to preach a sermon someplace. So you guys are my captive audience tonight. I hope we can get through it together. So would you bow with me as we pray? Father, I thank you for this time tonight. I thank you for this place. I thank you for each man and woman that's here tonight. It's not by accident that they're here. It is by divine appointment. It is by divine appointment that they're here. Lord, and you know where I'm coming from. Lord, I just bring what I have before you tonight. What I have, I bring before you, and I pray that you would do the work in me that only you can do, and that's take what I have to offer and make it into something that is inspired by your Spirit. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight tonight. Oh God, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Guys, I want to talk about something tonight that is probably on everybody's mind. Tattoos. Tattoos. No, actually, you know that tattoos have a long history. Did you guys know that? Yeah. And actually, they do. They go a long time back. And actually, the word tattoo has its origin in the Pacific Island cultures. It's the combination of two words. One is a Polynesian word that says ta, and it means to strike something, and the other word is a Tahitian word that says tatua, and that means to mark something. So how long do you think we've been striking our bodies to mark them? How long do you think? Thousands of years, yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, in 1991, they found a body in the mountains between Italy and Austria. And they called it the Otzi Iceman because the guy was completely frozen with skin and all. And they brought him out, and they estimate that he was probably 5,500 years old. And then as they were examining the body, they were even more surprised because this body had 57 tattoos on it. That guy was all tatted up. Yeah. So, how many of you guys have tattoos out there tonight? Okay, all right. Tattooing has become very popular over the last few years. You know, in 1965, there were only 500 tattoo artists in the United States. And in 1995, there were over 10,000 tattoo artists. It's estimated that 20% of the U.S. population has tattoos. Well, why? You know, I actually thought at one time that I might get a tattoo, but you see, it didn't fit very well with my intense fear of needles. I didn't like that. So, and I didn't like maybe the idea of sitting and having somebody poke me for an hour. It didn't go over very well with me. But why are they so popular? Well, some sociologists say that it's a reflection of our times. See, we're living in a time of constant change. And some people use tattoos as a way to express themselves and provide some stability in their lives. This is one quote that I read from a researcher who researched tattoos. They said, we continue to be struck by rapid and unpredictable change. The result is a loss of personal anchors needed for identity. We have found that tattoos for some people provide this anchor. Their popularity reflects a need for stability, predictability, and permanence. Did you get that last word? Permanence? You got to be committed if you're going to get a tattoo, right? Because it's going to be there for a while. So the question is, why are we talking about tattoos tonight at Fresno Rescue Mission Chapel? Well, very simply, I want to lay this out before you. God has a tattoo. God has tattoos. Does that shock you or surprise you? It surprised me the first time I read it. But it's found in the book of Isaiah. And we'll read it in just a minute. But first of all, we need to understand the background of who we're talking about. Who was Isaiah talking to in this 49th chapter? Well, he was talking to a lot of people that were a lot like we are today. People who were looking around for some anchors in which they could throw down to provide some stability in their lives. They were people that we read about and we see on TV in the Middle East, the Syrians. There are people who were displaced because of wartime. People who had lost their homeland because of what their faith was. They were people who were pilgrims and exiles. And they were the people that we were talking to, 70 years before this, their world had come crashing in on them, literally, because when Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, broke through their what they thought were impregnable walls, burned down their city, and then dragged off the population to Babylon. And so they were dragged around this foreign country where they had to find some semblance of real life. So that's one person, that's one group that Isaiah is talking to. There's another group within that group. And these were people that had actually begun the trip back to Jerusalem, right? You guys have read Ezra and Nehemiah, right? So after 70 years they had been in Babylon, then the Persian Empire came in and displaced the Babylonians. And God put it on the heart of a king named Cyrus to say it's time that the Jews can go back to their homeland and rebuild Jerusalem. So about 50,000 of them got together in Babylon and they began the long trek back to Jerusalem. But what did they find there? They found ruins. They found broken down walls. They found gates. And they found that they were surrounded by enemies who were committed to make sure that Israel would never be a strong nation again, or any kind of nation at all. Some of these pilgrims returning from Persia described for Nehemiah the condition of those who remained in Jerusalem. They said to me, this is from Nehemiah 1:3, the remnant there in the province who survived the exiles in great trouble and shame, the walls of Jerusalem are broken down, and the gates are burned with fire. So these guys were faced with a seemingly unsurmountable task of rebuilding the city, and yet they seemed to meet opposition and problems around every corner. And then, naturally, when they got there, they began to ask the question, well, where's God in all this? He's the one who commanded us to come back to Jerusalem, but where is he in all this? Maybe that's similar to some of you guys out there tonight. Maybe you've had your world like we talked about, like Rocky talked about. All of a sudden, life is good, and then something happens, and then all of a sudden, everything's out of control. You're displaced. Maybe it's a time that you thought you were doing right. You thought you were doing good. You were out there. You weren't hurting anybody, or at least that's what you thought, right? I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just doing my thing, and then all of a sudden, bam, everything changes overnight, right? You come home for that night of partying. This time you find the door locked, right? You find your suitcase on the door, and your wife or your girlfriend's finally got the guts to kick you to the curb, where you belong. And then all of a sudden you're displaced, right? And then by God's grace, you wind up here, by God's grace. You know that? But, you won't tell anybody, but maybe some of you out there are feeling like maybe I'm like those guys. I'm in exile. I'm away from everything familiar. See, but what you don't understand is that exile can be a sign of God's grace. See, it was for the people of Israel. Actually, those 70 years in Babylon were a sign of God's love and care for them. See, like us, those guys were leading an entitled life, right? They thought because they were God's chosen people, and because they lived in the town where the temple was, that they could live any way they want, as long as they went down to the temple and paid their religious lip service to God. They could do anything they wanted. It didn't matter how they treated people. It didn't matter how they treated poor people. It didn't matter if they kept their little idol dashed away, stored away in their closet. As long as they went to the temple and did their little religious duty, they were fine. They were leading an entitled life. See, but it was in Babylon that they finally learned what it meant to have a relationship with the Creator God. It was there where they learned what the law said, where it says you shall love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. See, that exile was a blessing for them. And similar for you guys, right? Or maybe that's your story. You remember that time that you prayed that little prayer, right? You were in that tight spot. You weren't going to get out, and you got down on your knees and you prayed that prayer, and you said, God, I'll do anything. I'll follow you completely. Just get me out of this thing. Get me out of this spot right now. I'll do anything. You got out, right? And you walked good for what? 2 weeks, a month maybe, and then bam, you went back to living the way you were. You were living that entitled life. And you see, you forgot that promise that you made to God. You forgot that prayer you prayed, but you know what? God didn't forget it. And God loves you so much that He's going to help you keep that promise that you made to Him at that point at your lowest spot. God loves you so much that He's going to help you keep that promise. It's going to take a long time, isn't it? But God's God. He's got time on His hands. So, enjoy your exile. Maybe some of you guys are like that other group. Maybe coming to the rescue mission was the first right decision that you've ever made. You're going to show God and everybody that you're not going to be the sum total of all the bad choices you've made over the last several years. Amen. So you're going to show God, and now, so you're doing the program, you're working it, you're doing exactly like we say, and I love Rocky's story. But what happens when that doesn't happen, right? You're doing your part. Now God's got to do His part. What is He going to do? He's going to restore my family to me. Amen. Or maybe I'm in the fourth quarter and I need that job because I need to get out there. But I've gone to 12 interviews over the last 2 weeks and they've all panned out. And maybe you're sitting there wondering, man, does God really notice? Does He take into account all that I'm doing? You see, is God going to come through for me? You're feeling a lot like those guys that we're talking about in Isaiah today. Man, you're feeling forsaken, you're feeling displaced, you're feeling forgotten. Well, how is God going to answer these people? And how is He going to answer us? Well, first of all, kind of surprisingly, there's an invitation for worship. You find in 49:13, He says, invites all of creation to worship God for all that He has done. It says, sing for joy, O heavens. Exult, O earth, O mountain, break forth into singing, for the Lord has comforted His people and will have compassion on His afflicted ones. But not everybody wants to come to the party. Look at the next verse in 14. It says, but Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has forgotten me. See, Zion is God's intimate name for Israel. It's used over 47 times in the book of Isaiah. And most often it's used with this term daughter. You heard that? Daughter of Zion. So daughter Zion doesn't feel comforted. She doesn't feel like she's the object of compassion. She's really had a tough time. She feels like the prayers that she's been praying have been hitting the roof and bouncing down back at her. She feels forsaken and forgotten. Maybe some of that feeling resonates with you tonight. So how will God answer what Zion's complaint? Well, He's not like us. God doesn't react the way that I do when my kids complain. He doesn't say, don't feel that way. You ought to be ashamed of yourself after all I've done for you. Don't feel that way. No, God validates their feelings. And He paints a picture for them of the most intimate relationship that they can think of. Verse 15 it says, can a woman forget her nursing child, that she would have no compassion on the son of her womb? See, the most intimate relationship. See, in an ideal world, in a perfect world, there is nothing closer than the bond of a mother and child. And maybe that's your story. Maybe you have fond memories of your relationship with your mom, your family. But we don't live in a perfect world, do we? We live in a broken world. That's right. We live in a world where mothers get lost in their pain and their addiction, and they will forget their children, won't they? And maybe that's your story tonight. Maybe you were abandoned by the one person who was supposed to be there for you. They forgot about you. Maybe that's where you are tonight. Maybe out there you're feeling forgotten and forsaken because it started way back when. But you see, God knows that this world is broken. See, God's a realist. God knows your story. Look what He says in verse 15. He says, even they, mother and child, even they may forget it, yet I will not forget you. So there must be something else that God can do to convince the children of Israel that He won't forget them. There's got to be something else He can do. So God says, I know. I'll write myself a note. Look at verse 16. He says, behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hand. Did you hear that? Did you get that? God's not just writing their names down. He's not writing their names down. He's engraving them. He's going to do more than just write that down. You know, when I want to remember something and I'm going to forget, you know what I do? I use these things. What are these guys? Post-it notes. And so I'll put them up on my refrigerator. I'll put them up in my car or put them someplace. See, but God didn't do this. He didn't put a post-it note on his hand. He didn't put a post-it note and write your name down there. See, and if I don't have paper, sometimes I'll even go to the extreme. I'll use one of these. You guys know what this is? What do they call it? Sharpie. They call it a permanent marker. Maybe I'll use that to write something on my hand. But it's not permanent, is it? No, because over time, that will fade away. That's why when we bury our loved ones, we don't use these things. We don't use these things to mark the place where we bury them. What do? We chisel it in stone. We chisel it in stone. We put their name and their lifespan in there, so with the hope that even after all many years, they'll still be remembered where they were. So God didn't use permanent markers. God didn't use post-it notes. He tells Zion that he's chiseled them into his hands. He's put them as a tattoo onto the palms of his hands. Why? Because he wants them to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they will never be forgotten. He wants to convince them that it's impossible for him to forget them, and it will be his remembrance of them that will drive his compassion. See, but all these are pictures, aren't they? See, all these are pictures because why? Because God can only talk in words that we can understand. So he says, I'll chisel you on the palm of my hand, but it has to be a picture. Because why? Because God he's a spirit. He doesn't have a body that he can touch. So he uses these words that theologians call anthropomorphisms. He takes a human attribute and he applies it to himself in the effort that we can communicate with him and draw close to him in relationship. You see, God wanted the people of Jerusalem to know with this picture that he was painting that they would not be forgotten. But you see, underneath that, right? Underneath that image, there's a reality, right? See, the world would have to wait. We know that. The world would have to wait 500 years. And then God would get a tattoo. He didn't sit in a chair. He sat on two wooden beams that were put at an axis like this. See, his irons were they weren't the tattooing machine, but they were the crown of thorns. They were the long steel spikes that were literally pounded into his hands and to his feet. They were the steel spear that the Roman thrust into his side. That was the irons. That was what made his tattoo. And the ink wasn't black. It was crimson red. And it took about 9 hours for that tattoo to set in. And literally, he died from that tattoo. He died from that tattoo. These tattoos had some unusual characteristics, didn't they? One characteristic, they were 3D tattoos. Remember that story where right after Jesus was crucified and all the disciples are huddled together in the upper room? They're all scared, and all of a sudden Jesus stuns them by walking through a locked door, and he goes right over to them, and John tells us the first word he says to them. In John 20, he says, "Peace be with you." And then he shows them his tattoo as a price that was paid for that peace. John says, and after he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. But there was somebody who wasn't there, right? Somebody was absent from that day. Who was that? Thomas. We call him what? Doubting Thomas. He comes up the next day and the 10 come by and they say, "You know, Jesus is alive. We saw him." Thomas can't believe it. He can't believe it. He says, "Here's what I need to believe. This is what I need. I not only need to see the marks in his hand. I not only need to see his tattoo. I need to run my finger over it. And only then will you count me in." Otherwise, I'm out. So 8 days later, what happens? Jesus shows up again, and he walks right into the room, and he goes straight to Thomas, and what does he say? He holds up his hand, he says, check this out! Check this out! Not only with your eyes, but with your fingertips. Check this out! He says, here are my hands. Put your fingers here. Here's my side. Reach out your hand, touch my side. Don't be doubting, just believe. Remember Thomas's response. What could he do? He falls to his knees and he says, my Lord, my God. The other characteristic of this tattoo is it really is permanent. See, even every tattoo that you have on your body right now, if you have a tattoo, is going to fade away. Why? Because you're going to fade away. Because we're all going to ashes and dust to dust unless Jesus comes back. But Jesus will wear his marks throughout all eternity. Amen. Listen to what the anthem of heaven is going to be. Worthy are you to take up the scroll and open its seals, because you were slain. And with your blood you ransomed people from every tribe, language, people, and nation. See, we will know Jesus by his scars, by his tattoos. You know, if you're deaf, you learn a thing called American Sign Language. Anybody know American Sign Language? She knows it. We know it a little bit. What's the sign they have for Jesus? See, even they know. That's how we recognize. That's how we're going to recognize Jesus, is by his scars on his hands. Amen. So now we come to the question, what was written in that tattoo? Isaiah told us. It says, I have engraved you in the palms of my hands. Did you get that? It's not just your name that's engraved in God's palm, but everything about you. Amen. Listen to the way that Charles Spurgeon, the great 19th century preacher, put it this way. It says, I have graven thee. It doesn't say thy name. The name is there, but it is not all. I have graven thee. It says, see the fullness of this. I have graven thy person, thy image, thy case, thy circumstances, thy sins, thy temptations, thy weakness, thy wants, thy works. I have graven thee. Everything about thee. All that concerns thee I have put all together there. It says, wilt thou ever say to thy God again, that God hath forsaken thee, when he has graven thee in the palms of his hands? So where are you guys at tonight? Some of you are like the children of Israel. Are you feeling forsaken and forgotten? Are you feeling like you're carrying something? Well, Jesus is up here tonight, and he's saying, come forward, find me in the scars, find me in the tattoos, find yourself in here. Is there something you're carrying? Is there a burden you're carrying tonight? Is it a sin? Is there something in you that you want to carry? Jesus is saying, come forward, come to me, and I'm there for you, just like Thomas. He says, come to me, and I'll embrace you. All right. Give me a minute, I'm almost done. Okay. See, anytime we come to God and we say, Lord, do you remember? Do you remember? Have you forgotten? Jesus says, I can't forget. Why? Because I wrote it down. I wrote it down. Each one of them. So I want to give you an opportunity, guys. Tonight, we're going to sing one last song. It's a song called Nails. So, why don't we stand together as we're singing this tonight? If you'd like to pray like our sister did tonight. Come on down front. We're going to hang around for a little bit. We're going to be praying with you. So come on down. So this is a simple song. All it does is said, the nails in your hand and the nails in your feet, tell me how much you love me. So maybe you guys know this. Let's sing it together. The nails in your hands, the nails in your feet, tell me how much you love me. The thorns on your brow, they show me how, for so much shame